Welcome aboard to the third NEA Power of Persuasion video that I'm doing. This is getting you prepared for the coursework piece of the English Language AQA, and it's the power of persuasion. Okay, so let's listen to the wisdom of Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the USA, who said, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. So first of all, you need to be choosing your mode. Is it going to be a written text, or is it going to be a script for somebody to be reading out aloud? Now, most students wisely do a written article. It's a good choice doing a written article because, after all, in your paper 2 section, the discourses exam, you will be writing an opinion article then. So it kind of makes sense to develop your skills in that area. You are killing two birds with one stone. However, if you do feel that you want to do a script for a speech, you've got to make sure that it would actually exist in the real world. Most people, when they're speaking out aloud, they don't read from a script word for word. If you were doing, let's say, a review of an album on YouTube, presumably you wouldn't have written out the entire script beforehand. Similarly, if you were doing a speech to people in a school or college assembly, you wouldn't be writing out the whole thing. So it's got to exist in the real world in a sort of highly formalized context. Think, for example, Emma Watson addressing the United Nations. So think very carefully about a realistic scenario in which somebody would actually go to the bother of writing a script out word for word and then delivering it in that way. Get your style model. Now, obviously, your style model needs to be the same mode as the text that you're going to be writing. But it's actually better if your style model is not the same topic. Yeah. If you do the same topic, then you fall possibly to the trap of plagiarizing. So you don't want to do that. Make it a different topic. And make sure that that style model that you're choosing is sophisticated enough. Not just any old rubbish that you've got off the internet. Make sure that it's got some great rhetorical devices which you are inspired by and which you can emulate, and of course, which you can be analysing in your commentary. Okay, print the thing off. Here's another American founding father, or rather an American president. Here's Abraham Lincoln saying, if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. Well, if you were alive today, you'd spend 4 hours sharpening the axe and then about an hour and a half on YouTube, I think. But it's wisdom. Yeah, it's good wisdom. So you've got your style model, annotate. Annotate your style model in detail using all of those AO1 terms in the booklet from all the different language levels. Don't just feature spot, oh, there's a pronoun, but always try and link in, why the writer has used that particular piece of language in order to position a particular response from the audience. Okay, so good annotation of your style model is really, really worthwhile because it will help you in you writing your own piece and it will help you in you writing your commentary. Obviously, share your style model and your notes with your teacher because they will need to approve it to make sure that it's sophisticated enough and that it's workable. Right, then we are into choosing our topic. Obviously, make sure that the topic that you're writing about fits convincingly with the mode and the genre and the audience and the purpose. And don't be boring. Don't just recycle something that you've already written before. Don't be tempted, for example, to think, what did I do in year 11? I did a really good persuasive piece there for Miss Brown. I think I'll just rehash that. Don't do that. Do something that's new, that will feel new. And try to make your subject topical. Because after all, if this were to be published in a newspaper or a magazine or a website, it would link in with a current news story. So think of a topical news story and think of an original angle as well. Remember that the top assessment band requires, and I quote, engaging content for challenging audiences, ambition. Okay, so engaging, challenging, ambition. You can't do all those sorts of things if you're just brushing down something that you thought of a year ago. Make sure that you research. Research your topic carefully. After all, you do want to come across as a real authority on the subject. So you need to be amassing some factual evidence, make some notes, read around. Let's hear what the experts on your subject say, write down some quotations from people, think of alternative opinions. Really be a good studious student and read around the topic. Then you need to be thinking about your structure. Now, remember, your piece needs to be around about 750 words, so which is nothing really. So it's important that you have a sense of how each paragraph will develop the argument. So where, for example, are you going to be putting the counter argument? Are you going to be putting the counter argument near the beginning, or in the middle, or at the end? And what sorts of topic sentences are you going to be doing? And how are you going to achieve cohesion? So what cohesive devices are you going to be including in order to lead the reader through your piece? And what about the ending? What are you going to do with the ending? Are you going to, for example, link your ending back to the start, so you've got a nice kind of cyclic feel to it? Okay, here are 12 tips then on doing a really good piece of persuasive writing text. First of all, your headline. Your headline, of course, is your shop window. And if you've got a boring shop window, then nobody's going to go into your shop. So your headline needs to grab attention. It can be quite hyperbolic. There might be some phonological devices that are going on there. There may be some wordplay. Look at that example. To donate or not to donate? There is no question. So there you've got a cultural allusion, a nice bit of intertextuality with a reference to Hamlet's soliloquy. Then you need a byline. The byline needs to summarize your argument. It shouldn't sound like the headline. It's a different sort of genre. Steph Heselton argues that reform of the opt-in organ donation system is now a matter of life and death. So it's not elliptical like your headline was. It's a complete standard declarative sentence, and it begins with your name. You are the journalist, and it gives an idea to the potential reader of your article exactly which way the wind is blowing. So what exactly you're going to be arguing. So headline, byline, and then of course opening. Now your opening needs to engage, doesn't it? It needs something either anecdotal or personalized or hyperbolic, or maybe a question or a statistic in some way. It needs something at the beginning that is really going to grab the audience's attention. Look at this example. Imagine there was a single policy that would slash unemployment and underemployment, tackle health conditions ranging from mental distress to high blood pressure, increase productivity, help the environment, improve family lives, encourage men to do more household tasks, and make people happier. A very bold opening that starts with an imperative and then gives you this list. It's apparently impossible. How could a single policy achieve all of those things? It makes me want to read on. And therefore it's a good example of cataphoria. Cataphoria is where you mention something which is then going to be developed later on. So your opening sentence needs to do something like that. It needs to intrigue your potential implied reader. Fourth point is the obvious point, that those rhetorical devices that we have been studying in previous videos, you need to make sure that you're including them in. So things like polysyndeton and litotes and antithesis. And if you've forgotten what those things are, page 266 in the AQA textbook, by which I mean this one, they will provide the answer to those questions. We also need cohesive devices. I've mentioned about cataphoria. Maybe you need anaphoria as well, which is a reference back to something. Maybe you're going to do clever things like questions at the ends of paragraphs in order to guide the reader through your text. So cohesive devices are very important. They glue together the different words, sentences, and paragraphs of the text, and they keep the reader reading. Underpin your argument with researched information. Yes, you've got to show that you have turned yourself into a bit of an expert on the subject. Here's an example. It is estimated that the US has the highest number of privately owned guns in the world. In 2015, there was thought to be around 300 million, held by about 1/3 of the population. Now, you're not going to argue with that, are you? Because by the use of stats there, it seems like the person who's writing this has done their research. They're a bit of an expert on the subject. So make sure that you underpin your argument with researched information. Don't just make it up either. Sometimes students ask me that, can I make things up? No, you can't make things up. No journalist would ever do that. Now then, experts, quote experts. Your experts will lend authority to your case. Here's an example. No wonder the public health expert John Ashton is among those suggesting a 4-day week could improve the nation's health. What you're showing here is not just your opinion that you're arguing here, but actually there are lots of other people who agree with you. So quote experts, they will give your case a bit of authority. Deal with the counter arguments. Don't just produce a thing which is utterly one-sided. You need to acknowledge there is possible opposition to your ideas and then go about deconstructing those ideas. Here's an example. Of course, some might argue that guns are a fundamental part of American culture, central to their history and heritage. But the same could be said in the past of slavery. Great example there where you set up the counter argument and then you knock it down. That's what you need to be doing in your piece. Make sure that you're varying your vocabulary. Never use a single word more than once in your piece. Here's an example. We see students wander around the college, ambling to lessons and loitering outside classrooms. You are a journalist, after all. You are in love with language, so why would you be repeating these open class words in your article? So variety is very important in terms of vocabulary. Variety is equally important in terms of your sentences. And by that, I mean variation in sentence type, minor, simple, complex, compound. Sentence length, sometimes very short sentences, sometimes lengthier ones. And of course, sentence function. So not just boring old declaratives, but also imperatives and exclamatives and interrogatives. Here's an example. Who needs jargon? Reading the stuff seems a sadistic chore. Translating it? Unspeakable. You've got different sorts of sentences going there. You've got, variety in terms of sentence function with 2 interrogatives, a declarative and an exclamative at the end there. And you've also got variety in terms of sentence length as well, with a minor sentence at the end. Make sure that you do interesting things, not just with your words, but also with your sentences too. Now, I know this isn't a media studies piece, and therefore you're not going to get marked in terms of the quality of the pictures that you include, but you might want to consider these other graphological features, such as subheadings and clever captions, to make it look and feel like it's an article and so that it's attractive on the eye. So if you do those sorts of things, it gives you an opportunity to show your understanding about genre. And then finally, the ending. Make sure the ending has impact, and you might want to end with a reference to your start. So you might remember our headline, the example that I gave, which was the reference to Hamlet. Example, complacency kills, so don't be a bystander assuming someone else will help. Act now to prevent tragedies, but not the Shakespearean kind. So it's a nice cyclic thing that we've got there. We've got a reference back to the headline, try and achieve that. Okay, so 12 tips, bits of advice on how to make your persuasive text really good. Let's just take a little bit of a look at the assessment criteria. Assessment criteria are usually pretty dull, I have to say. So I've tried to do a kind of translation of some of them. So it's going to get a mark out of 25. Your text, your commentary will also get a mark out of 25. It's going to, and in order to get into that top level, which is kind of A or A star, you're trying to do these things: creative and innovative use of genre, engaging content for challenging audiences, showing ambition, positioning and guiding the audience skillfully, and a very coherent and cohesive text. Okay, so when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking, yes, you're going to be really showing a good sense of genre, but you're also going to be building upon it in a really original, interesting way, rather than just slavishly ticking off certain genre features. Okay, and if it's up in that top level, then, because it's going to be challenging, you're going to be doing quite a difficult topic for quite a challenging kind of audience and genre. You need to give the sense that you're very attuned to the implied audience. You know exactly who you're writing for and what their possible responses will be. That's very, very important. You're trying to manipulate the audience's response in quite subtle and interesting ways. For example, you might use irony. And you're trying to produce a structure that feels satisfying with lots of cohesive devices, where things are woven together really adeptly to create quite a complex text. And the reader should feel that this is completely controlled. They're not going to get distracted by any kind of inaccuracies or awkwardnesses. It should feel completely controlled. Now that's your level 5. The level 4 below that, which is a kind of B, top C, are these sorts of things: convincing use of register and genre, interesting content, effective for audience, engages with possible audience views and attitudes, structured content to develop a line of argument. And you might think, well, that's all pretty good. How is that any different from what we've got at level 5? What I'd say is that in this level, you're going to show an understanding genre, but maybe in a rather more predictable way. It won't be quite as subtle and nuanced. You're going to show a really good knowledge of the topic, but maybe you won't have the same range of ideas as a level 5 response. You'll have a sort of broad understanding of how your audience might respond to the language of the text, but again, it's not going to have that degree of subtlety that a level 5 is going to have. And it's going to be effective in terms of the structure, but maybe it's going to be a little bit more predictable than your level 5. And you're even going to get occasional lapses. You're going to get occasional lapses of phrasing or sentencing where it's just not quite right and it's slightly distracting for the audience. That's the difference between a level 4 and a level 5. If you then go into your level 3s, which is round about your C and D kind of area, this word competent comes into play. It's okay. Competent use of genre, reasonably consistent, appropriate register, you're addressing the audience okay, it's organized, it's got a reasonably effective opening and ending. The big thing about your level 3s in this kind of area is it's quite straightforward. It's got a straightforward awareness of genre requirements, but it may be a little bit simple and simplistic and heavy-handed in the way that it does it. Okay, the register is going to be about right, but it's going to be quite obvious or predictable. Your paragraphs are going to be usually controlled, but the cohesion between the paragraphs may not be brilliant. There's going to be a straightforward awareness about the audience, but what you often find at this time on this kind of level is that the writer tends to underestimate the intelligence of the reader. It's going to be organized, but it may be a little bit monotonous. And the phrasing is going to be broadly okay, but there's going to be a little bit of clumsiness and maybe uncertainty in things like punctuation, like, for example, where to put commas in lengthy sentences, or where even to put capital letters in the right place. And whereas level 4 and 5 will have been spot on in terms of the word count, this may be a little bit beyond the word count tolerance. It could be, for example, 830 words or 680 words, rather than within 50 words of 750. Once you're down into your level 2s, what you're seeing here is quite a big level of inconsistency. So there may be some quite effective patches, but also there are some other bits which really don't read very well. It's going to be clunky. You're going to have phrasing which is broadly on the right lines, but quite clumsy. And the big thing is that the lack of control is going to distract the audience. So I, as the reader, I'm going to be sitting reading it, and noticing, for example, the lack of capital letters in certain places or the absence of commas, and it's going to get in the way of my actually enjoying the piece. And it may be a little bit repetitive, and the tone of it may be a bit conversational. So it may not have that feel to it that, it feels like a proper piece of formalized writing. And will there be rhetorical devices? Yes, possibly, but maybe they may be applied in quite an awkward way. The word count on level 2 might be quite a bit under or quite a bit over. Okay, so hopefully you are going to be up in this area here. That's a really good area for you to be thinking about whenever you're sitting there writing your piece. You've got to think, am I doing these things? Am I using language not just in a kind of repetitive, faithful way, but am I using language in a creative and innovative way? Am I showing ambition? Am I challenging my audience? Am I taking time to position and guide my audience in a kind of really well-crafted, skillful way? Good luck with it. It's a hard thing to do well. I wish you well. Thank you.